Alright, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Zero Two. Today we're taking a look at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta, like we do every week, every couple weeks. I haven't exactly figured out the exact interval that I want to do this on, but I wanted to make sure, especially with the new ban list coming out for our last one, that we gave the meta a chance to adjust, shift, and kind of like adapt to it so that way we can maybe see some changes, talk about some new decks, talk about how the older strategies are changing and adapting thanks to the new ban list, stuff like that. And so now feels like a good time to go back and take a look at things. We'll try and keep it about every 2 weeks, but that's where we're at with that. So without further ado, jumping in and looking at the meta as a whole here, we can see the first thing jumping out to us is after the ban list, Tenpai is now the most represented deck at the moment. Tenpai is apparently the best deck, followed very, very closely by Yubel. They're basically 1A, 1B. And a drastic drop-off for Snake Eye Fiendsmith, which used to have over 5, I think, percent of the meta dominance all the way up here at the top, is now sitting down at a lowly 16-30. But in all honesty, all of these percentages are a lot lower than what they were last week, and a lot of these like rogue meta contenders, even as far down as the second list, are kind of starting to grow in popularity in terms of their top percentage. So we're seeing a slightly more diversified format, something that's slightly less concentrated at the top. At least for the time being. I know with the new products that are coming out, especially Rage of the Abyss, it's going to make things, shake things up quite a bit with where the meta's standing, so that'll definitely make things interesting when that comes out, but for the time being, this is kind of what the format's looking, and it's looking pretty diverse. So looking at the top deck, we've got Tenpai. We'll go ahead and take a peek, although I don't anticipate anything crazy about any of these lists. And honestly, I don't think looking at this chart is going to help us all that much, mainly because this is going to be showing us data pre-ban list. Like, they still have the 3 Prosby and the 3 saying something. So instead, we'll take a look at this couple first place lists here. So we've got this first place list from the Psydeck Remote Regionals. So this is a very recent event playing a new ban list. And looking at what's changed here, the core Tenpai ratios are about the same, although it looks like they've opted to not play 3 Pydra and instead just play the 1 Dora Dora instead. It feels odd to me, especially now that we're down to 1 Sangan summoning. You'd probably want to be playing the Pydra at more copies so that you can guaranteed see the field spell. Additionally, some other things that have changed, of course, the Prosperity is now down to 1, and that doesn't change all that much about how the deck is built. It looks like we're playing Thrust in order to try and get to Terraforming, or maybe a Prosby if we really need it. The hand traps are still being flooded in here. I mean, Perulia makes a lot of sense here. I'm surprised to not see any attempts to like search the field spell via like some sort of Ancient Fairy Dragon in the extra deck or something like that. This one is particularly on the link package for the OTK to play around the dimensional barrier. And they're able to play a lot of singleton 1-ofs in the side deck, so that way, because they're on the Triple Tactics talent, so they can see it. Definitely an interesting list. Definitely a weird one. I'll take a look at another list real quick just to see if that's kind of like the prevailing opinion. This list looks a bit different. Again, their main deck choices are different, so we're seeing stuff like Book of Eclipse. The Bestial Magnum, I believe, was in the last list as well, but we're seeing 3 Pydra in this one, which makes more sense. It's a bit more in line with what the deck is playing. Main deck Droplet, of course. This one also not on the Ancient Fairy Dragon, so maybe that's not a great tech, but they are on the Dissipator as a 10, which is something I'm kind of surprised they haven't ventured into earlier. It's really strong. A Dragon Synchro that's level 10, which fits perfectly in with all their other Synchros. Really, really neat. I guess some other things to talk about this deck. This deck gets slightly more accessible given the fact that we just got Trident Dragon reprinted in the Megatins. It's now, as you can see, a $12 card where it was like a $70 or $80 card when the deck was first getting popular. And so now the only super expensive stuff is still $12 is a lot for a card, but you only need 1. The 3 Pydra are still each 10 a copy, so that's a solid price point. But the rest of the deck is all relatively cheap. Outside of a lot of the staples like Talents or Droplet or Thrust, or this one deck's not even playing Thrust in the main. we can see that this is going to become one of the more budget-friendly options as well in the upcoming format, so that's exciting to see. But that's enough talking about Tenpai. Again, not much change. Don't want to spend all too much time on it, because we got a lot of decks to go through. So we'll jump on down to Yubel, see how Yubel is looking. Again, Yubel had the lightest hits on the entire list. And again, we can't really take a look at this because we're still getting to see how the extra deck is shaping up without these 2 cards in rotation. They're on the 1 Spirit Gates, and it looks like this is slightly adjusted to handle that, but I do want to see what some of these top lists were playing post-ban list. So we can see the changes that were made. The 1 Spirit Gates is here. It is not changing all that much outside the fact that... No, not even outside of the fact. They're still playing the 3 of Dark Beckoning Beast to get to it, so the engine has remained relatively unchanged. They're still on the Fiendsmith stuff. Again, the banning of Lacrima doesn't really affect this deck all that much because they were going into Aerial Eater anyways a lot of the time to set up their main Yubel combos. So that without the Appaloosa in the extra deck, it looks like they've just put in... I can't even tell what they've added here. I guess maybe... No, they were always on Muckracker. I guess the Necroquip has made its way in here, which is nice. They're able to play the Desiree, which not all of the lists were playing at the time. And then Almirage is in here as well, in case they need to link off any of their main normal summons to get their combos off. I think this is for... I don't even know what this is for in this deck. I don't know what you turn into Almirage. Maybe you do that with the Dark Beckoning Beast to go into link combos. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, nothing too much changes for Yubel. Not honestly too much to talk about. Again, they hadn't changed any of their ratios all that much. They didn't really have to. They just filled in with a little bit more engine, it looks like, even in this list. They're playing a second Grave Squirmer, which I know not a lot of lists were on. They were main decking the Bestials now, if they weren't already, and it's just hand traps that fill up the space, so... Nothing too much crazy changes about this list, but it's still good to see it get a slight hit on the ban list, and hopefully this deck will continue to get hits because it is going to be very, very strong. It's the second strongest deck in the format right now, and honestly I wouldn't be surprised if, as the format evolves and we see more higher level tournaments, this takes over in those longer, more round events, because Tenpai has a lot more variance associated with it. Snake Eye Fiendsmith, still a deck after the ban list. Although, maybe not. I'm taking a look at this list of decks here, and it doesn't look like there are any that are ban list compliant at the moment. So it seems like maybe the Snake Eye Fiendsmith deck has just been really nipped in the bud, which is crazy to think about, given how prevalent it was in the previous format. But it makes a lot of sense. Without the consistency of having the 3 Ash, 3 Popular available to you, you're probably even only playing 2, but still, having only the 1 means if you draw it, it's really terrible. Not being able to do the combos up into the Lacrima stuff means that it's probably not worth it to play the Fiendsmith stuff when you could be playing some other better engines. And so yeah, it's definitely interesting to see this deck have such a hard fall off. I mean, we'll get to talk about it again since I peeked ahead in the meta, and we have Snake Eye Fire King to talk about, so when we get there we'll talk about it, but this deck was the king of last format, and I think the ban list, a lot of people were worried it didn't do enough to curb it, or it was still going to be the dominant best deck, and I think that remains to be seen once we get like the Azamina support. I do think that the Snake Eye deck will come back into its own and be really, really strong again, but as it stands now, the deck is very weak. And has just fallen off completely from any sort of meta contention, as we can see. Continuing down the list, we can talk about Ritual Beast again. This will be the 3rd week in a row we've looked at it, and honestly, there's nothing to really talk about, necessarily speaking. We can probably look at this, since the ban list didn't affect them that much, so looking at kind of their trends and techs is pretty important. Petalfin going down slightly, it means nearly nothing, because it's still in 82% of decks. People are probably still playing the 1 Petalfin for the bounce. Seems pretty strong. The Corridor engine, which I had been hyping up over the past couple weeks, is starting to see even a larger resurgence. They were already on the flag to search the Protoss, but against a lot of decks, and especially like potentially going first, the Protoss doesn't necessarily work all the time. Like, you can call fire, but if your opponent's playing Yubel, then it just doesn't work. Whereas if you're going in blind, if you set up a Colossus, at the very least, that's going to be alive against a lot of, if not all of the top decks. They all do some sort of searching to an extent. It's really beefy, really hard to get rid of, so having the Corridor, at least as an option in games where the Protoss isn't as strong, makes a lot of sense to me, and it's something I was surprised they weren't on at the beginning, but we're starting to see that rise up, much to my expectations. And it looks like they might even be cutting they weren't even playing necessarily Prosby, but it looks like they're probably cutting it entirely. Their extra deck space is relatively tight considering all of the tools they're trying to play. They do have a lot of just utility pieces in here, but at the same time, they need those utility pieces in the grind game. And so, yeah, otherwise, though, it's still just a Dimensional Shifter deck. It's a deck that plays very well under Dimensional Shifter, and in fact gets a lot of benefits from having all of their monsters banished. Ulti Canahawk is still a crazy card. It definitely enables a ton of combos, and it's nice to see an old deck getting some love. So I like seeing Ritual Beast doing well, even if I don't necessarily love what the deck is doing very all that much. Like, I don't like shifter decks. Really wish this had gotten addressed in the list, but it hasn't. So that's kind of where Ritual Beast stands, though. Not going to spend, again, too much time on it. We talked about it for 2 weeks straight at this point. Spright is a deck we got a chance to look at for the first time last week, but we are coming back to it again because it's still in the meta forefront, quote-unquote. It's not anywhere near as prevalent as the top decks, but we do get a chance to take a look at some of the stuff that Spright is doing. We're starting to see the Fiendsmith stuff becoming even more popular in Spright lists. It looks like about 1/3 of all Spright decks are playing a Fiendsmith package in there. Although that does include some data with the Lacrima, so maybe without the Lacrima they're not playing it. And in fact, if we look at some of the recent meta tournament results over the past... Actually, these aren't even that recent. These are relatively old. So that's June 30th is not something that's really much changed. So I guess there's not much recent data for the Spright deck list. But in any case, changes I expect in Spright going forward. This should be at 100%. I've been playtesting a lot of Spright, and this engine feels really strong. The Swap Frog into Mirror Mage engine feels great. Especially because with all of the nimble stuff you're playing, it doesn't even necessarily take up your normal to put a bunch of 2s on board. If you have Swap plus Angler, that's obviously insanely broken because the Angler also gets the trigger when it's discarded off of Swap. So super powerful. Spright still puts up some nasty end boards. I mean, you're going to get to see they'll make like Scylla Hat, and they'll make the IP, and they'll make like a Toad. So that's a lot of interaction there that they're setting up in their turn 1 boards. They have a lot of OTK potential with the Shadow Mosquito. So definitely a really powerful deck. And then I personally have been on the Melfi engine to go into the Herald of the Arclight because having something that prevents milling is really strong. And it also can turn off hand traps if you set it up and survive a turn. Because they can't send from their hand to the grave as cost anymore for stuff like Veiler or Droll, which is nice. But not too much to talk about. Again, I'm looking down here at the results. There hasn't been too much recent, so not too much to talk about. We'll move on. Snake-Eye Fire King. This is a deck I expect we have a decent amount to talk about, because again, it did have some more recent results. What's changed? They're down to 1 Ash. They're down to 1 Poplar. In fact, let's take a look at these topping lists here. There are a lot of Snake Eye variants I've seen online, at least, and some replays are opting to play Birch now, because that wasn't an automatic include in every single list, but it still does allow you to do some weird, fun shenanigans. And it's just a free summon from hand, which is nice. The Fire King engine obviously was where Snake Eye had its home before it kind of made its own full deck, and it's still very powerful. They can put up some pretty insane M boards where they can nuke your field on your turn. They're still doing the standard Snake Eye stuff where they end on the IP into SP stuff. All that's changed is we don't have access to the Appaloosa anymore, so you're likely sitting on like an Amblo Whale and a Promethean Princess now. Additionally, you could be going into... That's pretty much it, though. You could be going into Scylla Hat. Looks like this list is on Scylla Hat. Scylla Hat's always an option as well. This card has really kind of grown in its own. We can even see, looking at the market price there, it's already at $22. I remember I was lucky. I picked up my copy for around 7 on release, and this card I felt was going to be really, really strong because it's so generic. Any 2 effect monsters go into it, and getting to just search an extra piece of interaction, much less a layered piece of interaction, is super, super powerful in a lot of decks. And again, all you have to invest is 2 monsters. So getting a chance to put up some trap as part of an end board that's primarily monsters is nice to insulate against stuff like Droplet or Dark Ruler, things that would normally wipe out a full Snake Eye board. Instead, you still have to contend with the Azurian. And then because you use, say, something like Dark Ruler, now you've given them a turn, and Snake Eye is obviously so good in the grind game and the clapback. Even with the 1 Ash, even with the 1 Poplar, they're still going to be very, very powerful. So this deck looks very strong. As far as ratios go, they're on a lot of singletons, which is kind of surprising. The only thing in this Fire King deck, it's a 3 of apparently, is the Avatar Kirin. I wouldn't have been surprised to see them play more Ponix, or even more Garunix, because Garunix is really, really strong. But I guess you have such consistent access to it via the Yubel Star into the OSS, or you can even do Poplar into the OSS. So, super, super powerful engine. I expected this to be the dominant version of Snake Eye going into the current format, and it could even take some slots on its own. Again, it's really, really strong. Just because the Snake Eye pure deck is hurt by these limits doesn't mean that this can't still do everything it wants to. It's just a bit weaker. Again, if you open the Poplar, that's almost devastating for any of the Snake Eye variants. Continue onward though. We're going pretty quick through this. Should be a short overall episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta Snapshot, but nonetheless, we'll take a look. But this is a deck that we haven't really gotten to take a look at yet, and I'm kind of surprised because of how many people were hyping this deck up on release, and this is White Forest. White Forest is an archetype comprised of a couple of retrains of the Diabel's lore monsters, and they're apparently younger now and are all magicians. And in any case, they are a synchro-focused archetype that can summon a lot of powerful synchros, both on your turn and your opponent's turn, via some quick synchro stuff with Zapper Shrimp and whatnot. They set up, I don't even know the full boards they set up because I haven't really seen too much of the White Woods or White Forest deck stuff, but it looks like they're also on Runic. So again, we'll take a look here. It looks like they're on 3 of the main deck staple one. I know this is the expensive one. And then 3 of the tuner 4 and 2 of the other tuner 4. I know they all discard Whitewood spells and traps, and then the Whitewood spells and traps, when they're sent to the graveyard to activate a monster effect, can reset themselves. This one's a quick sync. I'm pretty sure this one is a reinforcement of the army, or it's just their Rhoda, yeah. The Runic stuff is pretty standard at this point. They're on the 3 Destruction, 3 Flashing Fire, 3 Freezing Change, 3 Slumber, 3 Tip, 2 Fountain, 1 Smiting Storm even in some lists. Sometimes it's Dispelling, sometimes it's 2 Dispelling in some lists. That's crazy. Very heavily invested in the Runic package. I mean, the Runic package is just very strong in any sort of compact engine deck because it provides a lot of great tools for going first and second. Tons of advantage with the draws off of Fountain. Is really, really powerful, of course. And then, additionally, the engine they're able to play is the Toy engine, which is Toy Box, and then Toy Soldier and Toy Tank. The Toy monsters, when they're sent from the Spell and Trap Zone to the graveyard, they can special summon themselves, and Toy Box can set them in the Spell and Trap Zone. I believe that via some of the effects of the Whitewood monsters. I don't remember which ones they are. I think it's this one. Yeah, their Reclia, if it's summoned, you can send a spell trap from your hand or field to the graveyard or search. You can send one of the toys that are already placed in your spell and trap zone, get the search, and then this is a free body for more link summoning or synchro summoning, because again, they're good levels in level 4, which combine well with their tuners to make good synchro 8s. But yeah, that's what Whitewood is looking like. The rest of it's all non-engine of choice, so hand traps wherever they can fit them in. But again, it looks like the hand traps are of such low percentage because they're on the runic stuff, so the runic stuff is likely taking up most of the deck lists as a whole. And we can take a look at some of the decks that they're actually topping. After the ban list, we can see that they were completely unaffected. None of the cards they played were touched on the ban list, except for Skill Drain, which they now have to play at 1 instead. But yeah, it's a basic, really tight monster spell trap package. Again, I think the whole engine is 11 cards in the main deck, so that's why they have the space to play stuff like the Runic Engine, stuff like a ton of hand traps. It's very compact. I've even seen some White Forest decks going into and playing the Centurion package as well. I don't think I can see any of those down here, so nothing to show off as an example, but I have seen some lists online talking about maybe playing Centurion Whitewood as an option as well. But those are the top decks. Again, there are others, and maybe it's arguable that I should go into and talk about some of these as well, because they do have a decent percentage, but I'm going to stick to my formula of talking about the top 7, but again, some other super powerful options. Kashtira and Runic, we've already talked about in previous weeks. Still very, very strong. Still relatively unaffected by the ban list. Memento is a deck I'm really hoping to see creep up, because I'd love to talk about it. A lot of cool stuff going on in Memento. A very strong end board with a ton of different pops, quick effect pops on your opponent's turn can be really, really powerful. And then Voiceless Voice, a contender, it felt like maybe 2 formats ago that had really fallen off in terms of usage and viability, but something that could definitely come back now that we're seeing a lower power level among the top 3 titans of the format. And of course, there's tons of other great options on here as well. A lot of ones I'm not even going to mention or talk about, but you can see the list. You can see that there's still plenty of options that are able to top at a high level if you're willing to invest some time into making the deck work. But without further ado, we're going to jump over to the text, the main deck text, and see how these are doing. I believe these, looking at them over, are all the same. There are a few changes in terms of percentages and placements, which we'll talk about here quickly. Imperm has significantly increased its lead over Ash Blossom. I believe last week it was around 80 and this was 78. Now it's up to 83 and 78, so an even further gap for Imperm than it was before. Maybe it was like 82 and 79 or something like that. All I know is that Imperm is rising in usage. Ash might not have even changed, but Imperm definitely rose. Sorry, not rised. And that's just a sign that we're in a very hand trap heavy format. Lots of decks are teching in 15 or 18 hand traps in the main, so not a surprise to see these jumping up. Nibiru jumping up is absolutely expected. With the ban of Appaloosa, a lot of decks lost their easy summon 5 answer to Nibiru, or even not summon 5 necessarily, but putting an Appaloosa up earlier in your combo, even if you're past 5 summons. If your opponent nibs you too early, you can just extend through it. So if you put up an Appaloosa before that point happens, then that's even better. But now they can't even do that because it's on the ban list. So Nibiru is going to be even stronger than it was last format, and it was already a very good option. So I expect this to rise even further as a main deck option. The Bystials are still very strong. Yubel is expected to be one of, if not the top decks. Again, we just saw it fighting toe-to-toe with Tenpai for that top spot, so Bystials are very strong into that matchup, and therefore will likely see a decent amount of play. Talents in the main, it looks like about 50% of decks are remaining Talents at about 2 copies, which seems to be what people have decided on as the optimal ratio for it. Super, super strong card going first and second. No surprise to me. It's a card that, in fact, I expect to rise a little bit as well. Veiler, it's Imperm Light. If you have the space for my hand traps, you're probably playing this as well, because single target monster negation is still very strong. Call by the Grave. We're seeing so many hand traps in the format that this thing just keeps climbing in usage. You're kind of at a point where you almost need to be playing Call by the Grave, because your opponent is reliably going to have 2 to 3 hand traps for your deck, and so you need to have an answer for that in the main, and Call by is one of those answers. Dimensional Shifter is now in 32% of decks. I believe it was in 30% of decks last week when we talked about it, or last time we talked about it, and it's grown slightly to no one's surprise. As long as this card is legal, people are going to be playing it in decks that don't instantly lose while it's resolving. And so decks like Tenpai, decks like Ritual Beast are going to abuse the fact that decks like Yubel, decks like Snake Eye cannot play under Dimensional Shifter, and simply lose the game if it gets dropped on them, it resolves properly. So this being in 32% of decks, though, is crazy. 1/3 of all top decks are main decking a card that is supposed to be a very niche, like, side deck option for some rogue decks. It feels frustrating to see this doing so well. I really wish it was addressed on the last list. This is probably my #1 problem with the format, is that Dimensional Shifter just turns a lot of games into coin flips on whether you've drawn Dimensional Shifter or whether your opponent's drawn an answer to it. And so just really, really disheartening to see, all things considered. Droll. Droll in the main makes a lot of sense. It made even more sense last week time we talked about it. Maybe even 2 times ago, because of how prevalent the Fiendsmith stuff was, and it's still going to be very prevalent. But a bit less so, and so Droll might fall off slightly, although the top decks are still very vulnerable to getting Drolled in the right spot. They're still doing a lot of searching from the deck, and so making sure to cut that off early and often is going to be important. It's also lingering, unlike the other 1-for-1s, so it can have significantly more impact over the course of a turn than just a singular Ash Blossom or Imperm would. On to the side deck techs. Cosmic Cyclone is still king. It was king last time we looked at it, and there's no reason to suspect it would go down all that much. We did have Skill Drain get hit on the most recent list down to 1, but that doesn't change the fact that there's still a lot of strong spells and traps in the format, and so Cosmic Cyclone being able to hit something like a Nightmare Pain, and being able to hit something like a Summoning, especially now that it's a 1, is so huge for the deck. And so Cyclone is going to be very, very powerful. We'll expect to see a lot of it in people's side decks, and I would expect when you're building your side deck to really consider playing it, because it's very, very strong. Dimensional Barrier is seeing a resurgence. I don't even think this was in the top 5 last time we looked at this. So definitely interesting to see this kind of shaping up into its own. Obviously now that Tenpai is the best deck, fighting for the best deck at least, but right now the best deck according to usage. Dimensional Barrier just ends the turn for them. Additionally, against something like a Ritual Beast, if you call Fusion, it's really devastating for them. Against something like Spright, if you call Xyz, a lot of their main combo plays are through Xyz monsters. Now, they can play with Links, they can do a lot with Links, but if they can't Xyz someone, their end boards are a lot less scary, and they can't extend as far through some other hand traps. And Whitewood is a synchro deck. They have a couple of other options, but for the vast majority of their cases, they need to be going through their synchro monsters in order to play and win the game. So a flipped up Dimensional Barrier can just end the turn against a Whitewood's opponent. And so there's a lot of top decks that really, really get shut down by just a Dimensional Barrier flip. And it's not surprising to me at all that this card is seeing this much play. Feather Duster in the side deck, only at half of side decks, is kind of crazy. I feel like this was higher last time we looked at it, just as a generic blanket. Spell trap removal, typically paired alongside Lightning Storm, since it's convenient to be able to play the 2 Lightning Storm and the 1 Feather Duster to keep your side deck tight, because with 15 slots, that's slots for 5 different pieces of 3 of side deck options. You can play less copies of some to fit in more variety, but at the same time you're losing a lot of consistency in the stuff you're putting in, so most of the time when you're looking at people's side decks, they're playing 5 3-ofs, or you can play the 1 Feather Duster 2 Lightning Storm as a 3-of spell trap removal package. It's not even strange to see that alongside the Cosmic Cyclone, because they kind of serve different niches. Cosmic Cyclone is for being able to be flipped on unfair quick effect or trap floodgates like anti-spell, whereas the Feather Duster and Lightning Storm are more intended to be played against heavier back row decks like a Labyrinth, or something that's going to just be setting a lot of back row. Maybe something even like a Runic, where you can hit the fountain against them. Spooky Dogwood has climbed even further. I believe it was down here last time. It is now the 4th. Oh, no, actually, it might have been the 3rd most used, so maybe it fallen slightly. But Spooky Dogwood's still seeing the side deck tech in about 40% of side decks. This was a card a long time ago, I mentioned this before, that a lot of people wrote off as being the worst hand trap of the Ghost Sisters. It only gains you life points, but in a format where it's really hard to win games the conventional way, winning in time is a viable strategy. I mean, I think a ton of people in the Yu-Gi-Oh community saw that MBT video where he discusses this in length, and I kind of fully agree where it's like, if we are going to be playing with these time rules for the extended period of time, which again, I kind of wish Konami would change them again, or at least come up with a somewhat better solution with them what we have now, but again, we're kind of at the point where we have to assume we're stuck with them. So if we're stuck with them, then absolutely deck building and side decking with the intention to win, as with that as a win condition, makes a lot of sense, because time is part of the game. It's not like a side effect of the game. It's not like something that just happens and you have to like deal with it when it comes up. It's something that you should be planning to interact with on a regular basis, like he said in the video. And so side decking Spooky Dogwood feels like an extremely appropriate way to address that. Purulia is on here, 35%. Again, I'm a big Purulia fan. I expect with the upcoming Rage of the Abyss and Fuaros coming out, that this will probably drop significantly in usage, although Fuaros is definitely going to be in the text section as a main deck staple. I think a lot of people in the OCG are already main decking 3 Fuaros in every deck just because of how strong it is. And we just saw recently in the OCG that the ban list came out and they hit Max C down to 2, so they're really trying to push the Mulcharmies over in the OCG. I expect them to show some love to the Fuaros here in the TCG as well. Phantasme seeing success is very interesting. I don't think this was on the list at all last couple weeks, so this is a good card to talk about. Having a card that can give you a lot of draws on an opponent's link board, especially against something like Yubel, where they might have a couple link monsters up on the board at a time, or something like Spright, where they have 3 or 4 up at a time. Can give you like 3-4 draws deep into your deck, puts a body on board turn 0, and is targeting negation to protect your board when you're trying to break it going second. So really, really powerful card against a lot of the top decks, because almost every deck is on some sort of link monsters. The exception maybe being Tenpai, but even if you force them to go first, they're going to be putting up the seals, so it's at least one draw with the Phantasme, where it wouldn't have been otherwise. So definitely very, very powerful. Not surprised to see it in the side deck text at all. Makes a lot of sense. Anti-Spell Fragrance, a one of course, but it's really powerful one of. Being able to turn off all of your opponent's spells for the turn is crazy. A lot of the top decks are reliant on normal spells, whether they're searchable or not, to get through their main combos, and so forcing them to be set for a turn can just turn off a lot of their main combo lines. Makes them a lot easier to interact with as well. So definitely not a surprise that people are playing this. Evenly matched, one of the best board breakers at the moment, but you really need it to be paired with something else. So you need something like an Imperm, you need something like a Droplet in order for it to get through, because a lot of the top decks are just able to negate it now, especially with the Fiendsmith stuff. You can just Desi-Ray it, and then they're evenly matched is useless. Obviously, opening multiples is really strong for that same reason as well, so not a surprise to see this seeing play, but it's definitely not at its best point at the moment. And then we already talked about Lightning Storm, so Crossout Designator is the last one here. This is on here just because so many decks are playing so many hand traps. Like I said, most decks are main decking 15 to 18 hand traps at the moment, so when you're doing that, and a lot of them are the same, I mean, you're seeing this, you basically pick 5 to 6 of these, and that's overlapping with there's a lot of overlap among these hand traps here, and so it's pretty free to just take a cross out. Oops, sorry, side deck. It's pretty free to just take a cross out, put it in your side deck, side it in for when you're going first, and then you feel a lot more insulated against your opponent's hand traps because you know that you're on so many yourself. Getting Purulia against the right deck can be devastating, so making sure that you cross out Purulia can be really strong. Additionally, though, some decks like Tenpai can play cross out and play Dimensional Barrier and then cross it out so that way they don't have to deal with D-Shifter going second. There's a lot of great utility for Crossout Designator. I honestly expect it to rise in popularity and usage, but for the time being, it's sitting as the least used, but still notably their side deck option. And so yeah, that's a holistic look at the Yu-Gi-Oh! Format as it stands right now. These are the top decks. Moving forward, I don't expect too much motion at the top. I would expect a lot more motion in this kind of like mid-range area around here, where we're going to start to see how these decks are shaping out. I imagine a couple of these will rise, a couple of these will fall. We're going to see Snake Eyes Fiendsmith probably falling off here, so it'll be interesting to see who takes that third slot. Is it Snake Eye Fire King? Is it something like Ritual Beast? With Ritual Beast being so powerful, are there decks and techs out there that people haven't been exploring that can beat those kinds of decks? It'll be interesting to see. I'm excited to see where Yu-Gi-Oh's going at the moment. I'm cautiously optimistic, so we'll just have to see where that format is in the next Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta Snapshot. But again, thanks everyone who stuck around for the whole video. If you liked the video, definitely go ahead and drop a like. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more content where this came from. If you didn't like the video, I'd love to hear from you even more. Definitely let me know down in the comments. Things you'd like me to improve, change about the video, anything you'd like to talk about. I'm more than happy to adjust on the fly. You know, at the end of the day, I'm making content for you all, so I want to make it the best it can possibly be. But thanks everyone for watching. Have a nice day. Bye!